No more Mr Europe Macron forced to curb EU ambitions. Paris French President Emmanuel Macron sees himself as Europe's savior, and this week's European Parliament elections as a make-or-break moment for the beleaguered European Union. But Macron is no longer the fresh-faced force who marched into a surprising presidential victory to the rhythm of the EU anthem 2 years ago. His pro-Europe Macron wanted that to be his shining moment to push his for a stronger Europe, but instead, who blame the 28-nation bloc for piles of problems, could achieve unprecedented success. They argue that elitist In person, the 41-year-old Macron comes across as strikingly, sincerely European. A political centrist, Macron has already visited 20 of the EU's 28 countries in his 2 years in office, and while he acknowledges the EU's problems, he says they can only be solved by fixing the bloc, not disassembling it. Macron over France's far-right, anti-immigration leader Marine Le Pen on a pledge to make Europe stronger to face global competition against the US and China. Since then, 4 months after his election, Macron outlined his vision for Europe in a sweeping speech at Paris Sorbonne University, calling for a joint EU budget, shared military forces and harmonized taxes. But with Brexit looming and nationalism rising, Macron has had to reconsider his ambitions. He calls his In March, Macron sought to draw support for Europe with a written call to voters in 28 countries to reject nationalist parties that offer. And he proposed to by the end of this year, based on discussion with a panel of European citizens. Macron can count on cooperation from pro-EU governments, but has made a point of not yet visiting Poland, 2 nations led by populist leaders, whom Macron accused last year of lying to their people about the EU. France has also been entangled in a serious diplomatic crisis with Italy, a fellow EU founding nation, over migration. Italy's Macron has little chance to repeat Europe-wide what he did in France, rip up the political map by building a powerful centrist movement that weakened the traditional left and right. The campaign for Macron's is being led by former European Affairs Minister Nathalie Loiseau under a banner called Renaissance. The party wants to, but across the continent, the centrists are expected to rank third or even lower behind the parliament's traditional 2 biggest groups, the right-wing European People's Party and the left-wing Socialists and Democrats group. Even at home, Macron is far from certain of being able to claim victory in the European vote. Loiseau's campaign, Le Pen's national rally, is determined to take revenge after she lost to Macron in 2017, and the European election campaigning has been unusually personal. Le Pen compared Macron this weekend to Le Pen isn't Macron's only problem. His political opponent, while he won 64% of the presidential vote in 2017, Macron's popularity has been around half that for the past year. It reached record lows when France's Yellow Vest movement broke out last fall, demanding relief from high taxes and stagnant wages for French workers, then slightly rose as extensive protest violence in Paris and elsewhere dampened support for the movement's cause. At a farmer's market in southern Paris on Sunday, several shoppers said they'd vote for Macron's party, but few exhibited enthusiasm. A few said they vote. Part-time construction worker Marc Lambert said that despite tax breaks and other gestures by Macron to quell Yellow Vest anger, the president still. Meanwhile, new Yellow Vest protests are planned against Macron and his government right up to EU election day. Catherine Gashka in Paris contributed to the story. For more news from the Associated Press on the European Parliament elections, go to
Raindrop, drop top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park, pot.